Hello, I'm Michael Cantrell, and you are listening to the Prison Officer Podcast, a place to have a conversation about the forgotten cops that work in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do to keep this world safe. If you love this podcast, hit the follow button, or better yet, share with your family, friends, or coworkers. Welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. Today's guest is DJ, or Dave Schilling, and he's worked in the criminal justice field since 2006 as a correctional officer, security threat group specialist, and gang instructor. His specialties are the use of runes and Norse Pagan symbology used by white supremacist groups, criminal intelligence process, and alternative religions beliefs such as radicalized Asatru and Odinism, Christian identity, and various other occult topics. He's the author of Norse Germanic Runes and Symbols, a field reference guide for law enforcement and corrections, and is considered an expert in this area. David has shared his information with runes and white supremacist symbology with gang investigator associations, various local, state, and federal agencies, prosecutors, and police in the UK. So I'm very happy to have him here today. We're going to talk about his book and some of the specialized information that he has in his head. And, we'll learn a little bit more about how they're using these runes and stuff in the white gangs in prison. So welcome, David. I'm glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate being here.
Yeah. So I always like to start at the beginning. So I'm going to back you up a little bit. We'll start off with, tell me where you grew up at.
I grew up a farm kid in the middle of the state of Minnesota, about 2 miles away from Minnesota River, where there's nothing but trees and cornfields pretty much. So that was life growing up, small town living. Grew up out in the country. Never would have foresaw myself doing all this stuff.
Was anybody in your family
kind of different?
Yeah, was anybody in your family involved in law enforcement or?
Oh, not a single bit.
Wow.
Not a single bit. I think I have one cousin-in-law basically who was a cop in St. Paul, but that's it.
Interesting. So
and he never talked about work.
Yeah. So what got you into law enforcement?
I moved to Rochester with my wife, and I was going to school for psychology at the time. And like a lot of other people with corrections, I needed a job, and the jail was hiring, so I gave it a shot and got hired. Before that, I'd worked in some healthcare fields before, working as a nursing assistant, passing out meds, all that type of thing. And the two fields are really, really similar, so corrections was kind of a natural fit.
Absolutely. So where did you start off working in corrections?
Same place I'm still at, Olmsted County Sheriff's Office in Rochester, Minnesota.
Okay, I've heard of Olmsted. And you work detention, or is there a separate gang unit that works law enforcement and detention, or how does that work?
We're a smaller jail. Our capacity is about 202, but thanks to COVID, we're nowhere near that right now, of course. But they've had gang specialists assigned there. I guess you might say we work them on the shift. We work units like everybody else does. Mm-hmm. Being the jail setting, you don't really have the luxury of specializing a whole lot. So anything you do with that is on your off time normally.
Right.
But as it goes, we wear many hats all at the same time.
I think they call that collateral duties.
Yeah, that's the unofficial term for, I think I'm stacked up with too much stuff.
Absolutely. We need somebody to do this, and you look like the person.
Yeah, you learn how to multitask.
Oh, absolutely. So you got a couple of hundred inmates there. You've kind of specialized here in the Aryan and the Norse white supremacist stuff. Mm-hmm. So how'd that come about? Is there a lot of that where you're at in that jail, or was it something you just fell into?
Well, it's a unique situation here in Rochester. We have Mayo Clinic is here.
Yep.
So with that being said, we get people from all over the United States that end up showing up here, from California, Arizona, to the East Coast, to Chicago and Detroit, and everywhere in between, it seems like, Texas. We've had Aryan Circle members from Texas up here. We've had, White Power Gang members from Arizona up here. We have our own people from Minnesota DOC, of course, too. Mm-hmm. House lodgers, all that for them. The runes and all that was always something I had a bit of an interest in. It's part of my own heritage, at least. And so, I always look up stuff like that. My whole idea behind that was someday go on vacation, go see the rune stones over in Scandinavia, that type of thing. So it was an interest before I got there, and once I saw what people were doing, that's when I kind of took a deep dive into it.
Okay. So
So that's
since you brought up the rune stones, there's always been something I've wanted to do. I love history too, and I have some of the Scandinavian in my DNA too. But supposedly there's some rune stones up around the Great Lakes, and then supposedly there's one in Heavener, Oklahoma. And I've been wanting for years to go take a weekend trip and go over there and look. Have you ever heard about those, or do you know anything about those?
the one in Oklahoma.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, wasn't that a wall that they were digging out? It was something like that, but there's runes on it. I've seen that on television.
Yeah.
One up by the Great Lakes, there was the Kensington runestone up there.
Yep.
That's Alexandria. And there's actually a show on the History Channel. I'm not sure if it's coming back on or not, but they were exploring the Kensington runestone to see if it's real or fake. And
Yeah.
the scholars always say that stuff is fake, but I have a hard time believing that an old Swedish farmer with low education is capable of making something out of a language that hasn't been used for a long time.
Right. And so this is the same language that we're going to be talking about. What's on these rune stones? I mean, the ones over in Scandinavia and what the white supremacists are using. It's the same type of runes, correct?
Well, there are actually seven different types of rune sets that are out there, and they've progressed over time. You start off with the Elder Futhark, which goes back to about 50 AD, roughly. Determining which runes were in use it works hand in hand with archaeology. The more stuff that they find from earlier on, then they can start to date things back a little bit earlier. So that's kind of how that went. They've discovered the Elder Futhark carved onto rock in actual correct order back to about that time, anywhere between 50 AD and 150 AD.
Mm-hmm.
What they've dated that at. Then as time progresses, languages change. They progress a little bit, and you need different symbols for different sounds in the language, and things begin to move on that way. All of a sudden, you have the Anglo-Saxon Futhark, that's what took place when the Vikings traveled over to England, for instance. And plus, you just had people migrating a bit as well, and
Right.
they needed extra runes to make sounds for their language, so that's why they have 33 runes in their alphabet, and the Elder Futhark has 24. That's kind of the grandfather of everything.
Interesting.
But if you go to the actual Viking area, then they have 16. They consolidated everything, so it's like a runic shorthand.
Okay. Now I know
So
that our prison gangs weren't the ones who just jumped in and started adopting this. How did we get the runes come into, be associated with white supremacy and stuff like that?
it probably all started back in the 1970s. There's a guy who actually lives just up the road from me here, about 35 miles away, a place called Lake City, Minnesota, and they used to be, I think it was called Viking House Press, and way back then he wrote a book called The Religion of Odin. This would have been early 1970s when Odinism and Asatru were becoming popular,
Mm-hmm.
and those religions were adapted by white inmates as part of their identity.
Right.
Native Americans had something, everybody else had something. So that's what white inmates decided to adopt because the religion works for them. It has a warrior mindset, so to speak.
Yep, absolutely. So, did Hitler use some of this when he was, bringing up white supremacy and everything there?
That's very interesting, actually. Hitler himself had no real interest in the paganism.
Okay.
Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler, who was the head of the SS, did, though. He was very, very big into the occult. The runes that they used in Nazi Germany have a strange origin as it is. You have what they call the Volkisch era, which is from late 1800s through the 1920s, where there was this big runic revival over in that area. People were getting into nationalism, that type of thing, and they wanted to know about their own background. The guy who came up with the runes primarily used by Adolf Hitler is a guy named Guido von List. And what happened with him is he had eye surgery at some point, went blind for a while, and he claimed that Odin came to him and channeled these runes through him,
Okay.
all with complete different meanings, the whole works. So it's all very, very new agey, even though it's back then.
So they weren't. That's when they kind of took it as what it was, which was an alphabet, and turned it into more symbology of different meanings and stuff for their religion or for their purpose.
That's what I'd say, because up until that time, the runes were primarily thought of as a script that people wrote in.
Mm.
It's always been said they have some meaning behind them as well. There's runic spells that archaeologists have found, much in the same way that some Christians will chant in church. They might chant the word Alu, Alu
Mm-hmm.
over and over, write that out in runes, and that's supposed to help them with gaining luck. And there's also various runes that are combined together in things called bind runes
Okay.
that are meant for a specific purpose, like one for good luck, Gibuaya. So that's a combination of a couple different runes, actually. It looks like a cross. If you've watched History Channel, you see them talked about the hooked X.
Mm-hmm.
It looks something like that, except without the little hook at the end of it. It's just straight lines.
So,
So it's kind of a deep history.
yeah, I mean, this is fascinating. When was the first time you saw runes being used? Or was this something you knew before you went into work at the prison and then saw it in the prison? Or was it something you first saw in the prison?
Well, what happened with me was I was always into this type of stuff. I always thought it was very cool. And, you look at your own heritage and all that. And the listeners won't be able to see it, but that's my name written in a bind rune on my wrist. And I have a few others on my body.
Okay.
And I never thought about it too much, except in the tattoo shop, which was in Faribault, where one of the correctional facilities is. People are walking in going, "Oh, hey, brother, how's it going?" And I'm going, "Good. Who are you?" And these are prison inmates who, were released, whatnot, and they hold their arms up and they have white pride on them when they put their hands behind their head and lean back. And
Yep.
I noticed some of their runes were a little bit different. The Othala rune was different with the little wings that were coming off it. That was more the Nazi era type Othala rune, which was something I wasn't used to seeing. I'd worked with Elder Futhark and that before.
Mm-hmm.
So I was aware of it, but then when I came to work at the jail, things really came into view. Because all it took was an inmate once to see me with my watch off while it was a hot day and I was sweating, took my watch off, kind of go wipe my wrist off, and he's like, "Oh, you have runes on you. Oh."
Yeah.
Next thing I know, I'm in charge of making sure that they get Asatru literature in the jail. So,
So,
which is good.
yeah.
Because I can control exactly what they get then. So,
Oh, absolutely. So have you seen them using it? How have you seen them using it? What would officers be looking for?
it's the same thing. Anybody else, when you're doing a cell search, for instance, you might look at people's artwork. That's something I always train new people to do.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just page through things. Take your time, do a thorough search. There might be symbology hidden within the artwork. As you all know from working in prison, guys love to draw.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is written communications. Guys will write letters in runes, try to send them out. And some staff will just send it right out, and off it goes, and we don't know what it said.
Right.
So what I've done is I've managed to basically train myself so I can translate all that stuff out. And I end up getting requests now from people, send me a picture of a letter that they have from their own facility, and I'll translate that out for them.
Mm-hmm. I guess one of the things that I remember when I would find stuff like that, a lot of times, since the runic work is so similar to artwork, we always had this argument, no, that's my art. And you can't do things with an inmate's art that you can with, contraband communications and stuff. So there was always this argument, is this a contraband communication or is this artwork? And so if you ran into this similar thing where you have that argument with them?
I go about gathering information a little bit differently. I don't confront people directly with it. I use elicitation, and I say, "This is really cool artwork. What is this? What do you got going here?"
Right.
And it's like anybody else. It's sales, basically. You go in there and you say, "Hey, I really like what you're doing. Tell me more about yourself." And people always love talking about themselves, usually.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So from there, it works out pretty well. And if I can, we have a small camera at the jail too. If we're doing a shakedown, I'll stick that in my cargo pocket. And a lot of time, if I find drawings, I won't even say anything. I'll just snap a picture of it and take it off somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Because, yeah, same thing. It's, hey, that's my artwork. You can't mess with that.
Absolutely. So tell me, which of the gangs are the ones that are using this the most that you're seeing out there? I mean, when I first came into the prison system in Missouri State Pen, it was literally ran by the Aryan Brotherhood and the Muslims. It was split down the middle, and all the gangs fell under those two. So it was really simple back then. And then when I went to the feds, I don't even know how many gangs the feds are tracking. So what gangs there's so many Aryan Brotherhood type gangs anymore. I mean, there's even one close to home here with, that's it. White Aryan Resistance. I think it's in Arkansas and Texas and the Aryan Circle. Mm-hmm. There's just so many of those. So what do you see? Which of those gangs are using this the most?
Anytime we get one of those guys in, they're almost always an independent that comes in. What happens is we get the people from all over the place, and when they come in, they'll just band up together regardless of the group that they were in.
Right.
We don't have any particular one group. Out of the prison system, they have groups like Superior Skinhead Nation. Those guys will all, hey, Dave, get me a copy of the runes. Okay, yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, it's sensitive stuff because you have to allow them to practice their religion under our lupa and all that. Try to make sure that they get their stuff, they keep happy. Facility keeps happy, they don't get sued, that type of thing.
Right.
Yeah, so our case is probably a bit special because we don't have any one particular group, but
sure.
Going to head to Florida next week for a couple days to speak at their gang investigators conference, and I know they do. They have large groups in their prison system that use all this stuff. So
you know which ones they're dealing with down there?
I believe it's the Unforgiven gang that they have a lot of issues with.
Yeah, I've heard of that. That seems like it's a newer one.
And like every other new gang, they're out to make their mark and make their bones, I guess you might say. So
sure. And usually the white gangs are the ones who like to do it just as bloody as they can to make a statement. I mean, that's the way the Aryan Brotherhood used to run back when, Barry Mills and Tyler Bingham. I had both of them while I was working feds. And,
Barry the Baron?
Yep. They did things bloody back then just to make a statement. And I think that's kind of held true with a lot of the white gangs since then, even though the Aryan Brotherhood's not as, it's still there, but I don't think it's as strong as it used to be. The feds kind of broke it up.
Yeah, started moving people off to different sites, separating them, AdSeg, all that. Might have made a dent. Guys always seem to manage somehow.
Tell me a little bit about your book and how you ended up getting to the point where you were, I mean, people are calling you. You're going to a lot of the gang conferences, so I'm going to go ahead and call you an expert in this field. So how did you get into this? I know people are reaching out to you for this specialized knowledge, and then you wrote a book to help out law enforcement and corrections. So tell me about that process.
Well, I got to start off saying that word expert scares me because that usually means my learning would be over with at that point. So I appreciate that, though. How I got into this was I went to a small state gang investigators conference over in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
And Wisconsin, they're very hospitable people. I love those guys out there. Just run into a couple guys. Hey, you want to have a beer? Sure. So I end up talking to these guys for a couple hours, and they're like, yeah, we have all these problems, whatever. And they were talking about the runes. And I said, well, what do you got?
Mm-hmm.
So they started showing me a couple things. I said, well, I can help you with that. And told them what they had. And they're like, oh, God, you need to do a class or something. I said, hell, I'll write a book. Well, at that point, I was stuck because I already committed. So next thing I know, I've got one of these here.
Excellent.
The ultimate COVID project. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. When did it come out?
November 2020, right before the Capitol riots.
Okay.
Which was, talk about timing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, that's great.
There was a few people that reached out about that, too. They're like, what are some of the symbols on the rioters? And it's like, nothing groundbreaking, but still interesting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of what I'm doing happened by accident, seemed like. Good accidents.
Good accidents, absolutely.
I can't complain.
Yeah. I really believe that, it's, at least in most of my life, my ability just to walk through the doors that were opened for me was what got me pretty far.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes you just got to take that step. A lot of it is luck.
For me, the biggest thing, just get out of your own way and If good things are going to happen, do it.
Absolutely.
Jump in and do it.
So I know you're not just focused on the runes, but you've done some other STG stuff on security threat groups. What are you seeing where you're at? I mean, everybody's always interested in the gang portion of, the annual training or whatever we have. People like to know what's going on. So what have you been seeing with STGs right now? Anything new?
One of the bigger trends is when people are getting booked into the jail, they always go through a gang assessment as part of the booking process. Over the years, we've seen a gradual decline to where people just don't admit to being in anything anymore. They've caught on that if they admit to being a gang member, it affects their classification. Plus, investigators start looking at them closer. So we rely almost exclusively on tattoos, and we have them on average of 6 to 9 months. So that's enough time to kind of get to know what people are up to just by keeping an eye on them.
Mm-hmm.
As far as any one particular group, COVID really knocked us down with a lot of that.
Right.
I think our jail population's maybe in half right now from what it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
So we get various people coming in, just a mix mash of things here and there. We have a lot of transplants in town, so you might get a vice lord from Chicago, then a gangster disciple. Out of the African-American gangs, GDs are probably the largest group we have around town.
Yeah.
Mainly because they're the largest gang in Chicago, period.
How far are you guys from Chicago?
Oh, gosh.
Couple of hundred?
I suppose a couple hundred. It's about a 4-hour trip, I think, something like that.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of...
get through all the toll booths and actually get somewhere.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of traffic between Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Chicago. So you guys are kind of on that corridor.
Constantly. We're right on I-90, so...
Yeah.
I-90, I-35 is, 20 miles away, roughly, so... Yeah, we're right on the drug corridors, and we even get a couple cartel guys in here and there, but they never talk about anything.
Right.
No matter how nice you are to them.
No.
Which I don't blame them. I guess I wouldn't either.
No. So you've been doing this for a while. I like I said, I know there's a lot of officers that are interested in the gangs and that portion of the intelligence. If you were talking to one of the newer officers, what would you tell them would be a good way to get started, and some of the ways that they could, build up their gang knowledge? Any words of advice?
One of the first things is just south of us in Iowa, we have the Midwest Counter Drug Training Center, where training is free. First thing I'm going to tell them is take your year of probation that you're on, learn your job really well, and learn how to talk to people, because without that basis of learning how to communicate and be respectful and be respected back, you're not going to get anywhere with this. If you go in there being the drill sergeant, just forget it. I don't even want to work with you at that point, to tell you the truth, because you're going to be a detriment.
Right.
Like I said, we don't interrogate, we elicit information. We let it come to us. It's all overheard conversations on phones. It's stuff like that. And we don't listen to the phone system ourselves. We don't have a lot of time for that. But if we hear somebody talking, we can send an email to somebody as well about that.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
The Midwest Counter Drug Training Center, though, is if a new person wants to get into it, I have a couple new people I'm working with right now. That's my thing. Let's get you to a conference. I'd rather you took a Gangs 101 course through MCTC first.
Okay.
They're very thorough. You have people like Lou Savelli and his group that teach that, and they're really thorough. You get a really good background over the course of 3 days. A lot of information all at once, but it starts giving you the pieces to work with.
Right.
And once you have that, then we can start. Then it's a matter of time. All that information, it's a matter of time and practice.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely.
Really it is.
I think you're absolutely right with the communication portion, and the gang investigators I've known. Really, they're the best communicators. They just are. I never did fit well in that job. I was always looked at as very rigid and policy oriented, and so that wasn't and not that gang investigators aren't policy oriented, but you got to have that little flow. You got to have that connection that you can make with that inmate sitting in the office to get them to talk to you. And I walk into a Get and Go or a convenience store right now, and everybody in there knows I'm a correctional officer. I just always carried that. So I never was real good at doing that, but I always was impressed with the guys that could. They get a lot of intelligence that we use every day.
Now, for what it's worth, I know how you feel with the convenience store thing that happened to me out in South Dakota, for heaven's sake. So this large Native American guy who was standing in line looked, he says hi, and I say hi, and he goes, "You CO, aren't you?" Something like that. I said, "Yeah." You got me.
Yeah.
He was cool, though, so.
I think I get called boss a lot more than most people normally do. And I feel like they know where I used to work or stuff like that. So
I know the feeling.
yeah. So I ask you, but I want to ask you again. Maybe you can expand on it.
Oh, sure.
As a rookie, which I talk to a lot of rookies on this show that they like getting some of the information on here. So as a rookie, when you're doing those cell searches, can you be a little bit more specific? What to look for? How you do those cell searches? I know you said don't just breeze through it, but tell me a little bit about how you do a cell search and explain that to some of the rookies listening out there so they can, because I'm going to tell you a story first. When I first started in corrections, I was pat searching, and an older officer walked up to me, and I'm doing this pat search next, and he goes, "What are you pat searching for?" I said, "I don't know, drugs, knives, whatever." He said, "You look like you're pat searching for watermelons." He said, "You're never going to find anything the way you're pat searching." He said, "You have to think small. And when you think small, you'll get the small stuff and the large stuff. But if you're only thinking big, you'll miss most of it." So I guess take what I learned there as a rookie, and what would you say about doing a cell search? How would you explain that rookie to do it better? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. The first thing I would say is establish a pattern when you're in training of how you're going to do a cell search and stick to it. That way you don't skip over areas. You know, if you walk in the cell, start on your left side, work your way around, however you decide to do it. Just make sure you have a set pattern where you systematically work through every little thing that there is. If you walk in our cells, first thing you see on the left is the sink, little half privacy wall, little shelf there. Start with all that stuff, look through all the little small hygiene stuff, look through all that. As you go over, you'll work over to where they keep their tubs full of their clothing and their drawings and books and all that stuff. You know, that's usually where your gold is, but don't skip over everything just to get to that right away. Take your time and get to it, because, you know, rolled up in the toilet paper, you might have a week's worth of cheap pills, that type of thing. Don't miss the forest for the trees with that.
Right.
That's really important. You know, because the obvious areas, you know, they all know the obvious areas too, so they're gonna, you know, maybe put one item in there that's oh yeah, hey CO, you got me. Well, a lot of people give up after they find the one item. That's the other thing. Don't give up. Okay, I found one thing. Put that aside. And keep going. Where there's one thing, there's another, probably.
Right. Yeah, it seems like, in the way I remember runes, you could find them on a lot of stuff. It wouldn't just be artwork. It wouldn't be this letter written in runes. They'll have them throughout the cell on little, just individual pieces.
Drinking cups, they scratch them in on the side, draw them.
And like you said, it's kind of hidden in plain sight. Yeah. So when you see that stuff, that kind of gives you you should start looking a little bit harder to see where there's more of that. Because, my opinion, you tell me if I'm right, if I find one or two runes, I'm going to find more. I'm going to find more of that communication stuff.
Absolutely. And that's also an inmate that I'm going to look at and go, well, I need to shoot up to him every once in a while and say, hey, how's it going? Oh, that's interesting. What do you got there? Since we're a smaller jail, a lot of the guys, like I said, they know, oh, Dave's the guy that can get us Asatru books. And so right away the conversation will start, oh, that's my good luck rune on my cup, so nobody steals it. And, you know, what are you doing drawing that modified R on the letter? Oh, that's the Rido rune to make it stands for safe travel. That means my letter gets to where it goes to safely. Yeah. And I've seen people do a lot of stuff like that.
So, since you brought that up, a lot of the religions, you know, they use their religion to try to get something extra in jail. So you're talking about Asatru and Odinism, which some places have a lot of that, some don't have hardly any. What are some of the things that, you know, maybe an officer should be looking through looking for during those religious services? Is there things that you can think of that would, kind of spark you and go, maybe that's not something they should be doing out there or something they should be talking about? Does that make sense?
Yeah, what I would say is if they're having a religious service, make sure they stick to a religious service and it doesn't turn into pulpit for politics, I guess you might say.
Yep.
Because there are some of the Odinist groups, I know I've talked to guys from the Fed system, and they're like, well, we have our reading list that they give us that we're required to go through and the knowledge test. But the next thing I know, we're talking about the book March of the Titans by Arthur Kemp. And that has nothing to do with Odinism or anything. It's the history of the white race.
Okay.
And about how white race is the best. So it's hard to marry those two things together. Or is a copy of Mein Kampf involved with your religious service? Or books by certain organizations, Woden's Volk, for instance, guys who published a lot of David Lane stuff.
Yep.
It's important to know the differences so they don't bring that stuff in either.
Because
and check the volunteers, for God's sake.
Yes. Yeah, we've talked about that on a previous broadcast. So I guess they should realize that Asatru Odinism, these are religions if they want to practice that. And when you start seeing white supremacist stuff, that's not part of those two religions. Is that correct?
No, that's correct. Asatru is the second recognized religion in the country of Iceland. So it's nationally recognized over there. And funny enough, one of the homes of all this stuff historically wants nothing to do with any of the racist stuff.
Yeah.
They're dead set against it because it was never that way in the beginning.
Right. Same with Muslims. I mean, the true Muslim religion, they don't have hardly anything to do with most of what's going on in prison with the Muslims in prison. So it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, they don't have the whole Moorish 5%er thing going on, none of that. They're just doctors and garbage men and whoever else, all walks of life, and they're just doing their thing, which I respect that.
Absolutely.
Then you get guys who, like you said, they take their religion, manipulate it, and next thing you know, well, I need special meals, I need this, I need that.
Well, this is my own lack of knowledge. Right. Is there special... I don't know a whole lot about Asatru and Odinism. I know how to recognize some of what they do, but is there special meals and stuff that go with that religion also? Is there holidays?
There can be. Oh, yes. There's a whole holiday calendar. I can't recite it off the top of my head, but
sure.
As far as their holiday calendar goes, a lot of the time they will have a ritual called a bloat. Bloat means sacrifice, and it could be anything as simple as having some juice in your cup, and you say, you talk to the gods one-on-one, and you take a drink of it, pour out a libation on the floor, and it's done.
Okay.
Or it can be as complex as you have a group of guys, and they have a drinking horn and everything else, and they go around and do their ritual that way. I think there's even one group in northern Minnesota that they're off in the woods somewhere. They have a farm, and they will actually sacrifice cattle.
Oh, okay.
And then cook it, of course. But
yeah. Interesting.
As was traditionally done.
Okay. Interesting.
So, yeah, as far as a diet goes, though, it's if they would request anything, it would be pork. We've had guys try to request maize, which they said, no, I don't want corn, I want maize, and they make this big distinction between the two, which to me they're a bit the same, and you make do with what you have.
Right. Yeah.
But by sticking to the exact letter of what they say they need, they make our lives a little harder. So I think that's what people often try to shoot for with us.
Oh, that's absolutely the goal sometimes. Yeah, just to try to make us work a little harder.
Plus, bringing pork into a facility these days is risky business sometimes anyway, because somebody's not going to like that.
Yeah, is that something that's written down in their religion specifically, or is a lot of the white supremacists doing that just to kind of tick off the Muslims?
It's in the religion.
Okay.
The thing about Asatru is it's a reconstructed religion. There's a few organizations out there, but there's no centralized dogma or doctrine. It can be what you make it out to be.
Right.
You don't need to have all this stuff that they say they need to do their rituals with. Just like you don't need to have a kneeler and a pew and a shrine to be a Christian or pray.
Right.
You know, those are all external tools. I don't know. That being said, a lot of the time it's a manipulative ploy.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's their job, is to manipulate us. That they're going to try to do it as any way they can, and sometimes, unfortunately, true religion is one of the ways that they try to do that. But
Nobody's more zealous than a convert, so.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for this. Anything else you can? I mean, I want to take a minute so that they can find out how to get a hold of you. But anything else you can think of that we kind of missed on this discussion of runes and?
Um, yeah, one thing to keep in mind, if anyone's listening to this who's a gang investigator, or if you work in law enforcement, might have to respond to a shooting situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was just thinking of Buffalo, New York, and a lot of those guys nowadays, they're what they call accelerationists. Their idea is to hopefully kick off the end so they can install their own set of government, so to speak.
Interesting.
You know, well, the shooter from Buffalo, New York had runic symbology all over his stuff.
Oh, I didn't know that. Tell me about that.
He has a particular symbol that he wore right in the middle of his vest that he was wearing. It's called the sun in red. It's a radial symbol of 12 Sieg runes that are all in a circle. I believe he also put an Othala rune on his rifle, is what I was hearing as well. Othala rune stands for ancestry, that type of thing. Among white supremacists, it's more like a racial pride thing.
Right.
Just stuff to keep in mind that if you, or for anybody, if you have children at home who are on the internet, have interests and stuff like that, kind of keep an eye on what they're actually doing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because all of a sudden they gain a huge interest in all the runic stuff, and same thing with POs who are doing home visits. Keep an eye out for that stuff.
Right.
It doesn't mean that they're bad, but it might be an indicator something's up.
Right.
It's always totality of circumstances with all this stuff. If you find one thing, keep looking. If you don't find anything, then it's nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you find that, then you find this online book off a Telegram called The Hard Reset, talking about making society fall by going out and shooting up places. Well, then you have a problem.
Right.
And you might want to look closer at your person.
But dwarven runes from Lord of the Rings is just a kid playing.
That's exactly. And I think those are actually in that book too that you'll be getting. So.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yep. I put a lot of different variations in there. My whole thing is I'm kind of sticking up for the runes with this book in a way too. And for also true for the people in Iceland.
Mm-hmm.
Because not everything with all this, it gets demonized quite badly thanks to the white supremacists.
Sure.
Squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Mm-hmm.
The big thing is to be able to discern so you don't go down a rabbit hole and miss the other stuff that's really going on.
Right, right. So if someone out there wants to get a hold of your book, tell me how they can find your book.
My book is currently on Amazon. If you go to the search field, just type in DJ Schilling. Should pull up right as the very first search result for you. Right on there, Norse Germanic Runes and Symbols, Field Reference Guide for Law Enforcement and Corrections. Currently going for $9.99. I don't foresee changing the price on that anytime soon. So,
well, that sounds like something every law enforcement agency needs to put in their gang task force room. You have a website also, correct?
Yes, it's runeresearch.com, all one word.
Excellent.
So if you have any questions, you can reach me through that. More than happy to help anybody out who has questions.
Okay. Do you have a way for them to send a message through that website, or do you have an email that you want to put out there?
There's a contact form at the bottom.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can reach me at david@runeresearch.com. And that'll be the same thing where the contact form would send you as well.
Okay.
Just without having to go through the website's little portal for all that.
Well, I can't thank you enough for getting on here today, and I know that there's a lot of people out there that are interested in this, and a lot of people are going to learn a lot from our talk today. So I appreciate you coming on the Prison Officer Podcast, and I hope we get to talk again.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'm up for it.
Okay, but I'll talk at you later.
All right, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
If you enjoy these podcasts, the best way to support the Prisoner Officer Podcast is to share these episodes with your friends or family on social media. Let me invite you to visit www.theprisonofficer.com. If you haven't already, check out the Prison Officer Podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button. Or leave us a message, or better yet, leave us a review. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast, Google, or Spotify, please click the subscribe button. Till next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, and please take care of each other out there behind those walls.